Hi, my name's Roy Crown, and welcome to another episode of Gospel Entrepreneurs. And what we're going to do in this series is we're going to catch up on two people that we're going to follow through on the dream. One is Steve G, and the other is Paul Cowley, who you remember as working for Iceland in rehabilitating people from prison. But my guest today is Steve G. Steve G, vineyard pastor. You probably know the story, stepping out of that church to plant a brand new vineyard in Milton Keynes. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Roy. It's good to be with you again.
Yeah, nice to. I think it was 6 months ago when you actually took the step to launch into Milton Keynes. Full of vision, full of life. How's it going, sir?
Yeah, as you say, we're 6 months into the journey, and like all things, there's the glory and the gory. When you step out the boat, sometimes things get a bit scary, and the waves get a bit choppy. But we're having fun, which is the most important thing.
And obviously, it doesn't just impact on you; it impacts on family, moving schools. There's a whole stack of stuff that you're kind of embracing. So let's start. How's it impacted on the family, Steve? Are they all settled in? Is it all good? Is everything fine and dandy?
Yeah, I think on the whole, we're really settled and we've kind of fitted into life in a new city, in a new community, all of those sorts of things. But it doesn't come without its challenges, when you step out and do something like this, plant a church, which sounds so romantic and amazing. The reality is that we do face opposition in lots of different ways, and some of those things are circumstantial, just things, the normal kind of buffetings of life, but some of them come because we've got an enemy. He doesn't like what we're doing. And one of the things that we found, one of the challenges that we found, is that if the enemy's going to have a go at us, he'll do it via our kids, whether it's sickness or kind of relational tensions or stuff like that.
And obviously, this is the third church plant or fourth church plant that you've done, Steve. So you're not unaware of these things.
Sure.
So how would someone prepare for that kind of thing? Or how do you recognize, hey, is this spiritual? Is it the bumps of life? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there is that sense of like you're putting yourself out there on the line. And I think you just have to kind of guard your own heart and dig some deep wells. So making sure you're regularly connecting yourself back to the Lord, and regularly in those places of connection to Him. We have to constantly come back to that place and just recognize that actually any kind of suffering and pain that we experience doing the best we can for God is nothing compared to what Jesus has done for us. You say it through gritted teeth, but it's that, counting it joy to share in His suffering. That's the reality when we step out and do these sorts of things. But that would be the same if you were starting a business or whatever. There's going to be moments where it's just really tough and really hard. And we have to dig in and we have to draw from those wells that we have to kind of invest in at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it all flows out of that anyway, doesn't it, really? So what have you done in the last 6 months, Steve? What actual steps have you taken? Is there a thriving church of 600 people now in Milton Keynes that had added to the ministry of Milton Keynes in 6 months? What have you been up to?
We've tried to keep things fairly simple. I think one of the challenges in this season is we are planting in a post-COVID world. And so, as most people in the church world would know, commitment looks very different this side of COVID. And so we've kept things as simple as we possibly can. We're kind of focusing on three things. We're focusing on building community. We're focusing on what it means to be a disciple or apprentice of Jesus. And we're starting to think about mission in our local context as well. So they're the three things that we're trying to hold together. And I would say for the last 6 months, the key focus has been that community building. We've gathered a whole bunch of people, probably about 35, 40 people who relationally are starting from scratch. They've all come from different backgrounds, different parts of the city. And so we've we've been doing some very intentional things to just build community. And I think the driver of that is that any group of people that make a difference, it's kind of always rooted in a deep sense of connection to one another. And so it just feels like we're really wanting to invest in our connection to one another. So we've done a few creative things. We've every couple of weeks on a Sunday morning, we've been doing something that we call Church Around the Table, where we kind of have breakfast together, we kind of build community together, and think about an aspect of our vision and what it is we're trying to see accomplished here, and just kind of trying to dig deep with one another in that sense. And then the other thing that we did more recently is we broke everybody up into groups of 6 or 7. And we called it Dinner for 6. And basically what we said was, for the next 3 months, someone takes a turn at hosting everyone else for dinner. And again, the intention of that wasn't Bible study. It wasn't going out and doing some sort of missional enterprise or anything like that. It was just purely, we want to build relationship and we want to get to know one another. We want to hear one another's story. We want to understand how each of us function and what some of our passions are and all of those sorts of things. So just really kind of like from the moment we started gathering people, just trying to build a sense of community. And then I think as we step into the next phase, we're then going to press the pedal on what does discipleship look like and what does mission look like. And so we're about to start some small groups, midweek small groups in different people's homes, and just trying to think about how do we mobilize people for mission? How do we get people to serve the city in different ways as well?
And so have you kind of given, it sounds traditional, worship, Bible study, ministry, which is the kind of vineyard formula. It sounds like you haven't started there. You've started in a different space, Steve.
Yeah, I think we wanted to kind of start around the table as that kind of metaphor, if you like, of like, what does it mean for us to build a genuine sense of community? We have been doing some more public kind of gathered environments. And so a couple of times a month, we will gather for, I guess, what you would call a worship service of some description. But the reality is that it's still really early days, it's and everything still is quite fragile, as they often are when you're in this kind of startup phase.
How did you find these people anyway, Steve? I mean, is that you must have done something intentionally within the community already to get these people to be part of you. How have you done that?
We've had lots of coffees with people, and I guess one of the things that's different this time around church planting is that social media is such a big part of our lives now. And so we have leveraged our social presence, I guess, online. And so I would say at least, I don't know, 80% of the people we've gathered have probably come because they found us online. Most people have come to us like that. Others were people that we kind of gathered before we moved here, people who were like hungry and had a desire to be part of a church planting team. And so we wanted to make sure we did have some bodies on the ground, as it were, when we first landed. And then just investing relationally as a way of kind of connecting people. John Wimber, who's the founder of the Vineyard, he used to say people come to church for lots of reasons, great preaching, great worship, great provision for their kids, but they usually stay for one, and that's community.
And it's really interesting that you're building off the social media, which is kind of not really connecting community, although some people would say it is a community in and of itself, but then you're shifting from that to a physical meal location. So is that the kind of conduit, is that the transition that you see will happen?
Yeah, I think that the reality is social media is a part of all of our lives, isn't it? Whether we love it or hate it, and I go through moments where I think I really hate this. But the reality is that has become a platform and a big open door to connect with the world around us. when we planted the church 16 years ago, that just didn't exist.
But you've also invested in a white van, Steve. What's that all about?
Yeah, I guess this has come from this idea of how do we begin to think about the missional emphasis of what we're doing. And so if anybody knows Milton Keynes, it is a very mobile city. You kind of have to own a car to get around the city. And so we were just thinking, what would be a useful tool to serve our city? And so we decided to buy this van. We kind of fundraised, and the hope or the desire is that this van would become like an opportunity for us to love and serve our city, and to do that on wheels, as it were. And so the plan is to kind of do some different projects on some of the different estates across the city. It might be that we can connect with families and communities who need us to help in practical ways. And then we've got the van to kind of help us do that. 25% of our city is green open space. And so there are a vast number of parks and places where individuals and families go and hang out. And so we thought, what would it look like if we rocked up in our van and served people drinks from the back of a van? So that's another thing that we're thinking about. And then we don't want to recreate the wheel. So there are a number of charities and organizations in our city doing some wonderful things. And we're like, how can we partner with them? And how can we take the limited resources that we have as a brand new church community and serve what they're doing? So one of the things that we're doing on a Sunday is this thing that we're calling Fill the Van. And the idea is that those coming to our services can bring some non-perishable food, and we can collect for our local food bank. So just trying to be creative in how we engage in mission in a city like Milton Keynes, which is quite unique.
And obviously, you've stepped into that space. There are other churches already there. How have you embraced that, or how has that gone down, meeting with other church leaders? Or have you met with other church leaders? Or have you been embraced with open arms and said, come, let's reach the city? How has that worked, Steve?
Yeah, I think the existing churches here in the city have really welcomed us with wide open arms. It's a city of nearly 300,000 people. So I think there's a realization that actually, if we're going to really see the mission of Jesus lived out in this city, we need a lot more churches planted here. We've got some great emerging relationships with the churches in the city. Some of them have kind of helped us in practical ways. We didn't have a projector. So one of the churches said, hey, we've got a projector. Here you go. Just little things like that have been really welcoming and affirming of what we're doing. There isn't this sense of competition, or are we here to just shuffle the deck and see a whole bunch of Christians go from one place to another? That isn't our intention.
You going round and meeting them has been a key part of your strategy, is it, Steve? As you kind of moved into the city to sense what God is saying and what they're feeling and thinking. So you must have spent quite a bit of time not just drinking coffee with people that you're bringing into your community, but with church leaders as well. Is that a key part of
absolutely.
A church planting?
And tapped into the networks that already exist. So there's a really great network of church leaders that meet together, every few months, and that feels like a real kind of room full of comrades, as it were. People who are really for one another. And so that was a really easy environment to step into. And I'm sure, in towns and cities across the UK, there are gatherings of leaders like that, and I think if you're going to church plant, if you're going to go into a community, I think it's the best posture you can have is to humble yourself and step into those environments, and introduce yourself. And I guess bring a sense of reassurance. This is what we feel like the Lord's doing. We want to join in with what God is already doing through the amazing churches that are already here in the city.
And that's all to do with tone and language and all of that, isn't it? The attitude and the spirit in which you're coming in.
Yeah, and actually to mean it as well, for that to actually be your heart,
And how entrepreneurial, if somebody's listening to this, they're thinking, okay, Steve, this is your third, fourth church plant. You don't sound very entrepreneurial, but maybe you are. Give us some of that, Steve, that if somebody's thinking that? How does the entrepreneurial gift link with a church planter?
I think it's that ability to kind of see what could be and recognizing that this is where we are, but this is where we could be. And then being the kind of person that says, well, if we take this step, this step, this step, I think we could get there. And I think the other thing for me is recognizing where my gifts begin and end. And actually, I might have a sense of like, this is where we're going, and this is the kind of picture of our preferred future. But the reality is that I don't have all the gifts needed to get there. And so what does it mean for me as a kind of future thinker type person to lean on the gifts of others and bring others in and invite others to come and be part of that journey, and for them to kind of bring their gifts to the table and say, you know what, well, have you considered things like this, or have you done this? And I think the reality is that when we started this journey, we had some ideas about this is what we could do, but it wasn't until we kind of landed feet on the ground and lived in this community and really kind of discovered what life was like to be in this city that actually the flesh and bones and the steps that we actually needed to take became a reality. Sometimes we think to be an entrepreneurial leader, you've got to be this kind of charismatic, gregarious kind of character. That isn't me at all. That isn't the role I play. But I do think God has given me the ability to see what the future could look like, and then to kind of figure out, how do we get there? And how do we shape things in order to achieve what we're doing? So going back to the van, we just began to sow a vision for that. What would it look like if we owned a van that we could go and do this, or we could go and serve the community in this way, or we could use it in this way? And we began to paint the picture of what that could look like. And, we paint that picture knowing we haven't got the money to buy a van, we haven't got the resources to do that. We just prayed and invited people as they feel led. If you feel like the Lord has given you the resources to contribute this, would you consider doing that? I think it took about 2 months, and we had the cash and we bought the van.
I think there's a few things that you're saying, Steve, that are really very, very interesting. One is that often the entrepreneur think it's all about me. It's kind of, I've got to be single-minded, single-focused, kind of, I'm the driven person to carry this. But actually what you're saying is it's shaped with others. And okay, you may see things, but they're shaping it with you. So there's a level of involvement and ownership. Whereas often we see the entrepreneur as, I'm going to champion this. You see a Bill Gates or a Richard, they're kind of single-minded, single-handed. They did it. When actually what you're saying is slightly different to that, and they shape it with you. And I think the other thing that I find really interesting, and I know this from knowing you, is you'll often say, this may not work. You kind of have that, which is very disarming. It kind of means that I think this is what God's saying, you have that spirit as well, which I think people will follow much more than the kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what you're saying, Steve, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I think, we can't guarantee the outcomes of anything that we do. And there's this combination, isn't there, between our effort and God's Spirit breathing upon what we're doing, and us figuring out, Jesus said, I only do what I see the Father doing, and so we have to kind of figure out, okay, Lord, what are you doing? And how do we begin to join you in that? We have to kind of remain adaptable in the process. I don't think we can come at this with just absolutes, because I think the danger is if we come at it like that, we end up playing at church rather than planting a church.
Yeah, and you crash and burn, because it's then all about you, isn't it? And it's unsustainable.
Absolutely. I think Christian leadership is all about downward mobility. You're constantly there to do yourself out of a job.
Which is a contradiction, because you've got to present vision, as you said, this is where we're going. And yet at the same, and then when people catch it, it's almost like you decrease and they increase. It's kind of this strange dilemma where you present it, see who catches it, and then almost let it go. It's a very interesting role there, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's the key to multiplication as well. If we want to see this happen in a repeated pattern, if we want to see more churches planted, we've constantly got to do that, and constantly got to see that kind of happen, and give ministry away, give people the opportunity to express who they are in the kind of bigger picture of the vision and direction that things are going. So yeah, I find that quite exciting, and it doesn't have to be all about me.
Hey, 6 months in, it's been great to chat with you, Steve. We're gonna have one final shot when, obviously, maybe a year in, we'll see where you are, what has actually planted, what it looks like, lessons you've learned. You're obviously still on the journey. Just a few final thoughts, Steve, that you may want to say to anyone listening. They maybe heard this, maybe they caught up with the first one. Now they're hearing this. What would you say if they're kind of listening? Am I? Should I? What do I need to do? How can I engage with them?
Yeah, I think one of the key things would be to, if you've got something emerging in you, a vision for something, particularly if it was church planting, sometimes it's helpful to say that out loud to some other people, and it might be that you are within a church network or a church denomination where that can naturally happen. And I would encourage you to do that. Take that next brave step to kind of say, this is the vision, this is what I feel like the Lord's placed in my heart. But if you aren't in that kind of environment, or you don't think there's a platform for that, then maybe they could even reach out to gospel entrepreneurs and say, there's something stirring in my heart. I would love to have those conversations with people where if there's something of an embryonic kind of thought or dream that they would love to see happen, particularly around church planting, I'd love to welcome that kind of conversation, and maybe they could reach out to us via the Gospel Entrepreneurs website. But I think that would be great.
And obviously we'd love, and Steve would love to hear from you if that's the case. So thanks so much for joining me today, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Roy.
And thank you to you all for listening to another podcast, Gospel Entrepreneurs, UCB in partnership with Revelation Trust. Do sign up, listen, engage, and maybe make a comment, feedback on what you've heard, what you think. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you for listening. Thanks so much, Steve, for joining me today. I look forward to the next session of Gospel Entrepreneurs.